today in Rich in Relationship. We're going to talk about how to let go of shame and learn so that your relationship grows stronger. Can't really go on without talking about there's a function to shame, all right? Shame gets a bad rep, but at its healthiest, shame is a social signal. It alerts us when our behavior has violated a value, expectation, or relationship boundary, particularly our own. The root of your shame is the judgment you have of someone else, someone important to you, someone dear to you, someone you're never going to be like, and yet it's impossible for you not to be like them. Welcome to another episode of Rich in Relationship. I'm your host, Rich Heller. And today we're talking about accountability without the shame. Imagine that. Imagine that your partner is holding you accountable and there's no shame involved. The fact is, shame often blocks repair. True accountability restores dignity and trust. Shame takes away dignity and reduces trust. What do I mean by that? If we make a mistake, take a misstep in our relationship, one that feels really yucky, it feels like there's something wrong with me, I can take all the steps to make things right in the relationship, but if I'm still walking around with that shame, my partner's going to be like, what is that feeling he's walking around with? Is something wrong? Maybe he's still doing that thing that he did, right? When we're walking around with shame for something we've done, our partner can see it as an emotion we're having for something we're doing. And shame is like debilitating. It reduces our self-esteem. It de-energizes us individually and relationally. Jennifer writes, when something goes wrong between us, it often turns into blame or defensiveness. One of us ends up feeling attacked. The other feels like nothing is really being acknowledged and the issue never fully resolves. How do you hold someone accountable without shame getting in the way or without letting them get off the hook? And this is a great question. I suspect, Jennifer, that shame might be something you're experiencing here, and it's not unusual. The truth is that cycles of blame, defensiveness, and unresolved harm are incredibly destructive, not only to our marriage, but to us personally. When we're in that space, any conversation about a mistake, about an error, about a misstep, automatically feels like it's a conversation about who we are. And defensiveness is the natural reaction to anything that feels like an attack. There is a way to address real harm while preserving dignity and making repair possible. And that's what we're here to talk about today. For couples who work together, this dynamic is particularly damaging. Why? For all the reasons we've talked about. If something happens at home that feels shaming, that takes away our dignity, and then we go to work, it inhibits our ability to function. Look, even couples who don't work together have this problem. If something happens at home and you're feeling shameful and then you go to work, you will perform less. The studies show that people who are in conflict in their relationship or going through divorce underperform and cost companies tons of money. So the truth is that anytime we have unresolved pain, shame, guilt even, it impacts us in every area of our lives. And when people work together, the impact is doubled because your accuser is in the room with you while you're working. Brad and Gwen, they know something about this. Several months after rebuilding trust from their earlier rupture, if you've been following along in this series, you'll know that Brad had kind of an emotional affair with a female client. Brad made a financial decision in the business without consulting Gwen, and when she discovered it, she felt blindsided. She thought, oh my God, it's happening again. Now it's just in another area. Gwen said, you did it again. You broke an agreement with me. You broke trust with me. You shouldn't have done that. And Brad said, so now I'm just a guy who can't be trusted no matter what I do. Brad immediately felt flooded with shame, and he couldn't have a conversation with her based on that emotion. He was too in his own shame. He got defensive. So instead of taking responsibility, he batted down her accusations. He justified what he did. He made her wrong for feeling hurt. And you ask, if they had all these great structures for repairing their relationship, why did this happen? Because we're human. We make mistakes. Because Brad thought the error he made was only on the emotional side revolving a female client. He didn't realize that there was such a thing as a financial breach of trust. Of course, if you're Gwen, you're frustrated, right? Because your emotions, your feelings are being dismissed. And this came up in like a legitimate accountability conversation that was part of their relationship structure. But because of the shame, Brad shut down, got defensive, and shut Gwen down, and it became a battle of identity. Brad felt he was being accused of being fundamentally flawed, a broken human being, and Gwen felt like her concerns, her needs were being avoided, were being nullified, like she didn't matter. And both felt the conversation feeling worse. So we got a call. We got a call from Gwen. Hey, Rich, what do we do? And they came in. What came out of it was an important distinction. Shame has two different forms. There's functional shame. Can you believe that? And there's toxic shame, right? If you listen to Brené Brown, if you're a fan of Brené Brown, which I am, I'm a huge fan of Brené Brown. She talks a lot about how shame can feel disabling. She doesn't talk much about functional shame. Now, Brad's reaction wasn't simply defensiveness. His nervous system had interpreted Gwen's criticism as an attack on his identity. That's the kind of shame that Brené talks about. Shame that feels like there must be something wrong with me. You're attacking who I am, as opposed to talking about what I did. He didn't see it as feedback about specific behavior, which Brené tells us is guilt, right? When we feel bad about something and it's the behavior, when we're feeling bad about behavior, that's guilt. When we're taking an action and we feel bad about who we are as a result of what we did, that's shame. That's internalized shame. Internalized shame where we're feeling bad about who we are instead of what we did. That is toxic shame. So the first thing we did was we encouraged Gwen to separate behavior from identity, because she kind of was saying, Brad, you SOB, here we are doing it again. What's wrong with you? She was able to say, when decisions happen without discussion, I feel excluded from something we're supposed to lead on together. Brad practiced owning the behavior without slipping into self-condemnation, which, he had some issues with this. You're right, I moved too quickly and I didn't include you. I see why that affected trust, is what Brad responded. So the first was to help them both distinguish behavior from who Brad was. And accountability becomes possible again in that context. If we're just broken, if there's just simply something wrong with us, there's no room for accountability. We can't be accountable, right? The problem is me, might as well get divorced, blah, 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 blah. When we distinguish the behavior from the person, accountability is a possibility. So we don't spiral into shame, we don't spiral into judgment, and we don't necessarily have to blow everything up. Now, I can't really go on without talking about, there's a function to shame, all right? Shame gets a bad rep because, let's face it, there's a lot of it going around. But at its healthiest, shame is a social signal. It alerts us when our behavior has violated a value, expectation, or relationship boundary, particularly our own, right? We start to feel bad about who we are when we violate our own values. Healthy shame says, something I did doesn't align with who I am or who I want to be. This type of shame encourages reflection, responsibility, repentance, and repair. But when shame becomes a judgment of our self-worth, that's when it becomes toxic. This thing I did, it proves I'm fundamentally flawed. Now, why does that happen? It's not unusual for us to have some old shame from our childhood that maybe we absorbed in that environment and sublimated unconsciously, and then we relive it in our marriage. In fact, very often we pick people and marry people who help us to unearth this old stuff and let it go. Brad unearthed some old shame in this process. And I've alluded to it several times that his own father was not so great at maintaining boundaries, both relationally and financially. And that Brad felt there must be something wrong with him because he was acting like this guy that he had judged as being bad, this guy he had judged as being wrong because of all the damage he and his family had had as a result of his father's actions. And when he started showing up like his father, he thought, I'm ashamed of who I am because I'm that guy. The root of his shame was the judgment of his father. I'm just letting that sink in for some of you, right? The root of your shame is the judgment you have of someone else, someone important to you, someone dear to you, someone you're never going to be like, and yet it's impossible for you not to be like them. It was impossible for Brad not to be like his father because it's 50% of his genetic history and half of his childhood. Once Brad got clear on that, once he let go of his judgment about his father and realized, yeah, his father made mistakes, but like any human being, he could learn from them and grow from them or not. That was his choice. It didn't mean that he was a bad person. It meant that he was a person who made some bad choices. Once Brad got clear on that, he was able to let go of his own shame and re-engage in his marriage in a different way. He was able to hold himself accountability because his nervous system was no longer in the defensive. When we're in the defensive, when we're in withdrawal or collapse, it's almost impossible to be accountable. Destructive, toxic shame creates a destructive loop. Here's how it goes. 1, a misstep, a mistake, or harm occurs. 2, that harm, mistake, misstep is called out, and shame triggers defensiveness. Not me, nope, not right. You're wrong, I'm right. Amygdala hijack. Defensiveness blocks accountability. Hey, I didn't do anything wrong. It's just the way you see it. Might even bring on some gaslighting in some people. The injured partner then escalates or they decide that the gaslighting is correct and that they didn't see what they thought they saw. But usually it escalates. No. You are so messed up. Why can't you see this? You keep doing this over and over. And the cycle repeats. It's the opposite of wash, rinse, repeat. It's more like stain, restain, and repeat. Things just build up and get dirtier and worse. Healthy accountability requires keeping shame, I was going to say contained, but it's more like healthy accountability means identifying the source of the shaming thought and releasing the shaming thought so that you get that you're so much bigger than your actions, so that you get that who you're becoming is so much more than who you were, so that you get that mistakes are behavioral and behaviors can be adjusted. Now, some of us feel shame about our thoughts and our feelings. Some of us even feel shame about our dreams. We have dreams that are out of sync with our values. And instead, I would encourage you to reframe this as we are the result of all of our experiences and conditioning. And many of us, most of us, aspire to be more than our history and our conditioning. And so view those emotions that are out of sync with who you're becoming. View those dreams even that may appear immoral to you or out of sync with who you're becoming as part of the discovery and release process. What's coming up is your unconscious mind is bringing up anything that is not like that person who you are becoming, and it has come to the surface so that you can heal it. And there are many ways to heal it. Anyway, that is what Brad did. Brad released his frustration, anger, hurt, sadness, guilt, and shame that was associated with his father and the part of his father that lived within him so that he could embrace the strengths his father gave him. And his father gave him some incredible strengths. And he did that working with us. That was a one-to-one intervention, an intensive 8-hour process. And once he did that, he was able to engage in behaviorally focused language. This is where if his partner, Glenn, leaned into the shame loop and said, Brad, I can't believe you did that. You're such a da-da-da-da-da. He said, listen, I am a child of the Most High God who has made a mistake, and I am learning from this, and I aim to do better. He kept his focus on where he was going, and Gwen said, oh, that would help Gwen step out of that blame loop that she was in. Instead of saying to him, you're irresponsible, she said, that really hurt, and I can't allow that behavior in my space. And he said, I recognize that that behavior hurt, and I will not engage in it anymore. Instead of saying, you're irresponsible at work, she was able to say, that decision affected our relationship, our shared leadership. Brad no longer had the internal signal of shame in regard to this, but he now knew what shame was, what it looked like, what it felt like, what it smelled like, what it tasted like. So if it came up again, he could learn the lesson and move on. Because remember, all emotion is here for a reason. All emotion has a lesson in it for us. If you just lean into that part of yourself that sees who you were, who you are, and who you're becoming, it sees the lesson in the emotion to help translate your internal ecology and your behavior so that you're becoming more and more that person. Shame became information, not his identity. They shifted the focus quickly to what happened, what impact it had, and what will change moving forward. Not who will change moving forward, what will change moving forward. Accountability was no longer about judgment or verbal punishment or emotional punishment. It became a path back to alignment. And over time, Gwen and Brad felt like it was safer to address mistakes because mistakes no longer threatened their personal dignity, who they are, their intrinsic value as a human being. And we all have intrinsic value as human beings. A thing I like to tell people when they're feeling a lot of shame and a lot of guilt is, as human beings, we all have the capacity to be Adolf Hitler, to be Judas, to be anyone who you demonize. We all have that capacity, and we all have the capacity to be Mahatma Gandhi or Jesus Christ, the capacity to become like that. I'm not saying, for those of you who are Christians, I'm not saying that you can be born that way, but you can become more like them. We have the capacity to become like that, right? And so I want you to get that who we are is not always a reflection of how we act. If we make a mistake or we make a misstep, there is always the opportunity to reassess and to reset and practice repentance, if you will. Accountability and shame are often confused. I mean, how many times have you heard the expression, you ought to be ashamed of yourself? All right, people often say that as a form of accountability. But really what they mean is either you've done something that's really way out of the norm, or you've been doing something over and over again that you need to address. In fact, societally, shame was shaming someone was a means of keeping people within certain behavioral norms. It had a function. Healthy shame alerts us to when something needs repair, right? Healthy shame is I'm way out of alignment with who I want to be, who I'm becoming, with my values. Toxic shame convinces us we are the problem and ensures that since we unconsciously start to believe we are the problem, we're going to keep doing what we did. Brad had come to believe that he was his father, who he had demonized and who he rejected. And so as a result, because he hadn't healed those emotions, he continued to act them out. And in fact, he would have acted them out more and more until he healed it. Repair, healing does not require humiliation. The requirement of healing is honesty, right? We got to clean the wound. Responsibility, we have to make our side of the street clean and straight. We have to reconstruct boundaries. And dignity, we have to know that we are dignified human beings who deserve a fulfilling and healthy and happy life. If we don't believe that, then how are we going to move forward? If I don't know that I'm a person of value, how can I set straight that which I made crooked? Hey, if you are struggling with shame or guilt, if you're having trouble resetting, if you feel like you're sabotaging your life your own life, sabotaging your marriage. If you're an entrepreneur and you're not making the money you should with your partner because you're working together and there's a lot of self-sabotage going on, a lot of criticism, a lot of judgment that feels dirty, it makes you feel dirty, give me a call. Rich at Rich in Relationship. We help Brad, we help Gwen, we can help you. Go to richinrelationship.com and grab a free call with me. And in the meantime, I want you to get that you are a person of value and you are becoming that person you so desperately want to be. And you are that upstanding partner, parent, citizen, child of the greater good. All right, in the meantime, I want you to have an amazing day and a fantastic tomorrow. And next episode, we're going to talk about containment, the missing ingredient in healing. Join us then.